morning, everyone, and welcome to the ChMc Masterclass. My name is Ellen, and I'm an Events and Networks Coordinator at CMI. I will shortly be handing over to David, who is running the session today. But first, I would like to introduce our two guest speakers who will be joining us for the Q&A. Alex Luck, People and Change Consultant at KPMG, and Raghu Ramkumar, Senior Strategy Consultant at Arup. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen. We shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A session. Today's session is being recorded and it will be shared with you later on. The event recording will also be made available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David, ChMc Assessment Manager at the Chartered Management Institute.
Brilliant, thanks Ellen, and morning everybody. I hope you find this session useful today. I want to focus today mainly on in my presentation, mainly on the professional discussion element of the assessment process. But I think it's really useful to remind ourselves what we're assessing against and take a little trip through that as well. So when we think about what we're assessing against the Chartered Management Consultant Competency Framework, and you will all have access to this if you haven't already. Once you register with us, all this will be made available to you. We're looking at four main areas when we're looking at competencies. We're looking at values, ethics and behaviours, and this is really, really important. And what I want to stress on all of this is your competencies. We're looking at you and not your organisation, your firm. So we're looking at your values and ethics and behaviours. What values do you have? How do you support those values and ethics of the organisation as well as your own? Then we look at leadership and management and how you meet the competencies within that area. And then we look at how you interact with your clients and the client operating environment. And there are a number of elements in there, and I'm not going to go into those in detail, but we look at all of that. So we look at, what is your ethical position? How are you on leading and managing others and leading and managing yourself? How are you looking at your clients and how are you working with your clients? And then very importantly, this is not a fixed point in time. This is the start of a longer journey, a longer part of your career as a management consultant being chartered. And so we look at your personal and professional development as well. And we look at that from 2 points. We look at it looking back, what got you to here, and looking forward, what are you going to do moving forward in order that you maintain the high quality of support that you provide and the high quality of service that you provide for your clients. So we look at all of those areas and then we come up with a holistic picture as to whether or not you are suitable to be awarded the chartered status. And it's really important that you understand here that we're not evidencing your organisation, we're not looking at their training programme. We don't want to see all the training information that they give you or the leaflets they hand out or the documents that you get sent electronically or whatever. We want to see what you've done, how you've made a difference, and why you should be given the chartered status, not your organisation. That's a challenge for a lot of people, and I'll talk about that as more as we go through this quick presentation. So before you start, a couple of things that I'd like to just share with you really. One is from Rudyard Kipling's The Elephant's Child, and this I've used in all sorts of areas of my life, and I find it personally really useful. And it's from a poem, and the line goes, "I keep 6 honest serving men, they taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when, and how and where and who." And if you think about those 6 questions, it really helps you when you're building your submission and when you're looking at your professional discussion. And personally, I find it helps me in a lot of things. If I'm doing something, why am I doing it? What am I doing? When do I need to have it done by? How do I need to do it? What's the quality there? What's the price involved? Where is it happening? Who else is involved? If I think about those things, I can build a really solid picture of why I need to do something. And the other thing you might want to think about when you're approaching your professional discussion is the STAR technique. And this is a really useful technique that a lot of people are using now in interviews, for example. So we talk about the situation, what was happening, the task, what did you need to do, what action did you undertake in order to achieve that, and what was the result. And that's really useful tool to think about when you're thinking about answering questions and dealing with issues that come up within the professional discussion. So hopefully you'll find those useful. And again, as always, these are just 2 tools in a toolbox. If you've got something else that works for you, go with what works for you. If you want to try these and they work, great. If you want to try these and they don't work and you think that's just really not me, then fine. Whatever works for you is great. But I would try and find yourself a couple of tools that work in every situation. So when we think about the assessment process, there are 2 sides to the assessment process. First of all, there's the written submission. And we like to think of this as your ticket to the dance, if you like. Why should we take you to the next stage? And there are 2 elements to this. The first stage is there's an experienced professional route for those people who've got more than 7 years experience as a management consultant. Now I stress that's as a management consultant, not as a manager, not as a consultant in some other field, but as a management consultant, because we're looking at that wider breadth of knowledge that is required to be a management consultant. The other route through to assessment is through the on-program process, and that requires at least 5 years being a management consultant. And you may be coming through this route if you're coming off the back of training, if you've been on a graduate program with your firm, for whatever reason you've reached that stage and you want to go through this, that is often the best route for you. And it really is just down to experience and the way you've used your experience, evidence of experience that you can bring to the process. So once you've done that written submission, that will get you a ticket to the dance, or it won't. And you get 3 chances to get that right. So if you get a referral at that stage, don't take it as a bad thing. If you get a referral, it's often an opportunity to polish what you've already submitted. One of my assessors will look at it and they will say, it's almost there. We just need a little bit more. If I take you on at this stage, I'm setting you up to fail. So I just need a little bit more detail. Something here is not quite giving me the confidence to take you on. So can I have this, this, and this? And treat that as an opportunity to get it polished, rather than as, oh God, I've got it back. I must be terrible. Don't think like that. This is a good thing. The only time it's not a good thing is if you get it referred because you've broken confidentiality rules, and that's a whole different ballgame. If you break the confidentiality rules, your submission will be deleted and you'll have to start again, and that will be one of your 3 submissions. So do make sure that you adhere to the confidentiality rules when you submit your written submission. So hopefully that's all gone well. You've got your ticket to the dance, and now we want to see what you can do. So we take you on to the professional discussion. And following all of that, once you've been awarded the status, we will be checking in with you on a regular basis to see how your continuous professional development is going. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? If not, why not? What's changed, and what do you plan to do for the next 12 months in order to maintain your status? So some key points from that part of it, that early part of it, is it's all about what difference you make. And a really good question is, why you? If I'm going to pay the fee that your company charge, why should I get you? Why would I want you to do something for me? That's what we're looking for. Not why should I engage with a firm, but why should I engage with you? What is it about you that makes you different, makes you head and shoulders above everybody else? And we're thinking about quality, not quantity. We don't want hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents. You need to do this. Think about ABC. Think of it as accurate, brief, and concise. Tell us why we should deal with you, why you meet the criteria. Tell us easily and quickly. Make it easy for us to say, yes, come on, let's go to the next stage. Let's see if we can test this out for real. So we move on to the next stage, the professional discussion. And it is really a discussion rather than the questions and answers. You're not being interviewed. These are 2 peers, you and the assessor, both quality people, both looking to get the best out of this discussion and find out about your submission. So you've written your submission. This is what you say you can do, but we can all do that, can't we? Standing up and proving it, backing it up, is a completely different thing. And this is why we have this second session as well. So it happens virtually. It will be happening on this media or a very similar media. The worst case, it will happen on the telephone. And I say the worst case because we want to see you. We want to see what you're doing. We want to engage with you. We want to have that personal one-to-one as near as we can virtually. It will be about an hour. And we say about an hour because it will really depend on how the conversation is going. It will be a minimum of around 50 minutes, but it could go on to an hour and a quarter, hour and 20. And either side of that is not a problem. Either side of that doesn't mean if you're done in 50 minutes, it wasn't very good. If we're dragging you on, you might feel, to an hour and a quarter, that doesn't mean it's not very good either. Those are not indicators of performance. They are about quantity of evidence that we're trying to get out of you. There will be a discussion related to your CPD and say how you got there, what you're going to do next, how you're going to maintain your status. And there's a big push on ethics as well. We really, really do focus on ethics and how you apply those ethical behaviors, how you've made a difference ethically, how you've been challenged ethically and what you've done about that, how you've reacted to those challenges. We do want you to succeed. We're not going to take you on to professional discussion if we don't think you've got a chance of doing this. Now, there are a couple of times when that falls down, and the biggest one is if you don't turn up. Now, I don't mean physically turn up and be on the other side of the Zoom call. What I mean is you come to it half-hearted. So make sure that when you do this, you come to it fully prepared to do it. Treat it as an important client, because in the end, that's what we are. So we want you to succeed. We're not going to waste your time. We're not going to waste our time. There are no trick questions. This isn't set to catch you out. We want to hear about what makes you great and why you should be awarded the status. And remember, this is you. This is all about you. Now, this is a really hard bit for a lot of us because we're brought up in a culture that says it's us, it's a team, it's not me, me is bad, I is not what we want to hear. But in this instance, this is exactly what we want to hear. We want to hear about you. What difference did you make? Why did you make a difference? How did you make a difference? Why should I engage with you? Why should I grant you this status? It's not a test, but you can fail it. Now, you get 3 chances at the written submission, but you only get 1 chance at the professional discussion. So make sure that you're prepared for it. Make sure you actually turn up and you're there fully, bring your whole self to it. Make sure you leave enough time because, as I say, we talk about around about an hour, but it could be longer. Make sure you have time beforehand. Don't try and squeeze this in between 2 other meetings. If you can't allow a 2-hour slot for this, give yourself time to prepare and time for overlap, then you haven't got enough time to do it. Although we say an hour, you need time either side. Now, I've seen people fail because they've tried to squeeze this in, and we've had people say, I have to stop now because I've got to go to another meeting. That's not what you want to be approaching this with, and that's not how we would recommend you do this. Give yourself the best possible opportunity. Treat us as you would an important client and treat the whole process with that respect. Be a consultant in that moment. This is not an academic exercise. We are looking to see what you would do in the real world. How do you behave in the real world? Because when we give you the status, and hopefully you're successful, you get granted the status, that's what people are going to see, and that's what people expect. So we need to see, how will you be with a real client? How are you going to be in a certain situation? Remember, it's about you. So I always say, I, Captain, it's about me. I'm doing this, I did that. I am wonderful, you should give me the status. Not quite as bad as that, but you know what I mean. And ask yourself this, if this was flipped around, would you give yourself the status and why? And if you wouldn't, if you can't answer that question, or you wouldn't, you're not ready to do this. Take a bit more time. Give yourself the best possible opportunity to succeed. So the other thing I want you to think about is think about the ethical test. Think about your best client. How would your best client react if they saw you in this professional discussion? How would your friends and family approach it if they saw you in this professional discussion? How does it feel? Do you feel ready to do this? How would you feel if your professional discussion ended up on front page news? Would you be proud or would you be a bit embarrassed? So approach it in that way. We're not going to share this with anybody. It is confidential. But if it were to be shared, how would you feel? Are you giving your best performance? Are you being the best you possible on that day? So some key takeaways for you. Make sure you turn up fully. I don't mean physically, I mean everything. Bring your whole self to the process. Take it seriously. Treat us like your main client for that 2 hours. Think of it in that kind of gravitas. We're not going to give this to you based on hierarchy. This is about the difference you've made and why we should give it to you, because you meet the competencies, you make a difference, and you're adding value to the industry across the piece. And remember, this is all about you and not about your firm. Biggest thing I would say, treat this as a real pitch, and you are the engagement. So that's the end of my input for this morning. We're going to go back and get some questions and answers and talk to some of your colleagues who have been through the process for themselves. So morning, thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. So there's a number of things I wanted to talk to you about today, but I think as we're focusing in the presentation on the professional discussion, I think if we start with that, we talked in the presentation about being ready, turning up and being prepared to undergo the discussion. And we need to remember that it is a discussion, not a question and answer, even though sometimes I guess it can feel like that. But with that in mind, did you put any rehearsal into it? Did you practice beforehand? And if you did, how did that practice go? And what did it entail? And maybe you didn't practice, I don't know, maybe you came to this quite naturally. Be good to hear what your thoughts are there.
So I'm happy to go first. I guess I did have a practice. So just for context, I came through on the on-program route, so I had to do both the submission and then the portfolio of evidence because I joined KPMG 6 years ago on the graduate scheme, so had sort of got that experience to date. And because of the application submission, you have to have your endorsement. And so actually my sponsor who wrote my endorsement said, let's have a discussion. Let me dig through your application and let me ask some example questions. I think the hardest part of that was actually trying to not talk about the client, using the client names and trying to not disclose anything confidential. And to talk in more of the rounded general way and bring it always back to the competencies. So it was fortunate that sponsor had actually gone through as an experienced professional before, so sort of had some example questions, particularly around ethics that I think I had not anticipated would be asked and then were asked in the real thing. So yeah, I would absolutely say to get someone who's gone through the process to do a little example mock one would be helpful. And yeah, certainly helped me.
I noticed, and I think this is really important to share with people, you mentioned the maintaining the confidentiality, and it's really easy, isn't it, to slip into clients and to firms. But I think from our point of view, what I want to stress is that does nothing at all for us. We don't grant status based on having worked with Barclays or Santander or Shell or BP. It's not about that. It comes back to that bit about you. And I think, but it's a real challenge, isn't it? I mean, Raghu, did you have the same kind of experience?
Yes. I think, I remember quoting client names a number of times and getting corrected by my assessor saying, oh, can you please not mention client names? But talking about rehearsal, I think what I did was I spent a considerable amount of time working on my submission. So, going back and forth, thinking about the right projects to include in the submission, thinking about how the activities I had performed on some of those projects aligns with the competency framework, working with my colleagues and mentors to get their ideas and views in terms of how some of the examples could be better positioned. So I'd done all that homework upfront because I was aware that the discussion itself was going to be based on the submission. So just a couple of days before the discussion, all I did was thoroughly go through the submission, ensure that, I understood what I had actually put in as part of the submission, and then almost create a mind map of, okay, what sort of examples I have actually included for some of these competencies. So I would say I went through the experienced route because I'd spent a considerable amount of time and have about 10 plus years of experience in the management consulting industry. So it's eligible to go through the experienced route. So, it was essentially thinking about the submission and then, replaying the submission ahead of the discussion, I would say. So my rehearsal was essentially focus on the submission and have a mind map of what examples for what competencies.
I think that's a really important point to make as well. And I can't stress enough that this isn't a question and answer. We don't have a bank of questions. And the assessors aren't sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to take Alex through, I'm going to ask question 5, 9, 12 and 2. I'm going to take Raghu through, I'm going to ask questions 1, 4 and 6. It doesn't work like that. It is very much based on your submission, and the conversation that they will have with you is entirely around your submission and bringing out what you've said in that and picking up on any slight gaps there might be. Not gaps that are enough to get you referred, but gaps that are, we might think, well, that's a little bit weak, but we can discuss that in professional discussion. It's a really good point, Raghu. I think picking up on what you've both said, if there was one piece of advice that you would give about the professional discussion, what do you think it would be?
I think knowing your submission inside out, because if I remember correctly, one of the first questions that the assessor asked me was, tell me one area you want to highlight in your submission. And if you hadn't really been that familiar with it, I might have stumbled a little. And I think he also asked me, what area don't you want me to focus on in your submission and why? So they were two quite open-ended questions that weren't narrowing straight down onto one part of that submission that I was able to take in any direction, but actually I couldn't talk about something completely different. It needed to be grounded back, obviously, into the submission. So have it up, have it handy. I think, like you, Raghu, I had a bit of a mind map on a piece of paper where I was sort of drawing out what are my top 3, let's say, kind of client examples that I really want to talk about. But yeah, just be really familiar with it. And remember your driving license or passport at the start, because I forgot mine, so I had to run off and find it. You have to prove your identity. So it's a small thing, but I had to find it.
Yeah, it's a small thing, but it puts you off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I can mentally get back in the room and start again. It's a bit of an interesting one, that one.
And from my point of view, in terms of advice, I would say, latching on to what Alex just mentioned, know your submission inside out. And David, the point that you mentioned around it being a discussion, right? So personally, the conversation that I had with my assessor felt more like a conversation with a client rather than a very difficult, hostile, tough interview environment. So I would say, be yourself, and it's all about the individual. So I think we should be confident in terms of what we have done, why we have done it, when and where, and what's the context. So I think, my piece of advice would be, just be confident, be sure of your submission, and be yourself, and treat it like another conversation with a client rather than an interview.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's been echoed by some of your peers as well, that have said they've really valued the opportunity to do that, because how often in our careers do we get the chance to do that? We can talk to ourselves, can't we? We highlight the best bits of us for a pitch, maybe, or the dreadful elevator pitch. But having that opportunity to reflect and think about what you've achieved, what you've done, how far you've come, for a lot of people is really, really valuable. I don't know. How did that feel for you going through the process for both of you?
Yeah, I think I have to admit all of it felt reflective, from the, submission itself, the portfolio of evidence that was, quite chunky. I needed to go through every competency evidence, how I've demonstrated that. Actually being able to take that time, I took some study leave days and holiday and just sat and did it. It's probably all in all a good 3 or 4 days where I just really tried to carve out the time to be really reflective and think about that journey that I had. Because you always go from one thing to the next. And I don't think I had ever fully realized in a 6-year sort of career, I know it's not all that long, but actually how much experience I had, and being able to package it up and pull on feedback and things like that to evidence it. So I definitely found the whole experience to be pretty reflective, and a bit of a luxury in a way to do the portfolio discussion and just have a good conversation. And very rare you get to do it. So
I completely agree. I think it was a very good reflective exercise for myself as well, just because choosing the right projects and thinking about, okay, I've actually done all this activity on this project. Thinking about it now, yes, it's actually relevant to some of these competencies. So it also helps you kind of reshape and frame some of the things that you've done previously. in a better way. And I think the structure of the competency framework itself, the 4 areas in terms of ethics and values, leadership and management, the client operating environment, and the personal and professional development provide a good framework to think about all the examples and experience. So yeah, personally for me as well, it was a very good reflective exercise, I would say. It took me a little while to pull together the submission, but then once I had it in place, I think it was seamless.
Yeah, yeah. And you're absolutely right, Alex. It's about the time, isn't it? Both of you have said really, it's about making sure you carve out the time and treat it seriously. One of the things that we find sometimes in a professional discussion is that applicants can be really entrenched in a specialist area. And that can be a real challenge for people to try and get out of that rabbit hole, if you like, and demonstrate that they have the broader skills. How have you made sure that you were able to demonstrate that much greater breadth of skills and knowledge rather than just being stuck in one particular area?
I can probably go first on this, Alex, if you don't mind. So the challenge in my case was obviously I had considerable years of experience, but then starting to think about I've done a number of these projects end to end, starting from project initiation all the way through to rollout and change. So what can I choose? And I think at that point, an idea that occurred to me was to use a program or a portfolio example, the work that I'd done on a program level or at a portfolio level rather than a project level. So while I did have examples on specific projects, when you start to kind of roll up one level and talk about program, you feel all the more confident to address a number of different broader aspects rather than the specialist aspect alone. So I think that was one good thing I did as part of my submission. I had 2 examples highlighting my program experience at a program level or portfolio level, and then a few examples talking about specific projects with focused on strategy consulting, which is my background essentially. So I would say if you have an opportunity, talking about your experience working on a program or portfolio will give you a chance to talk about broader management consulting skill sets and expertise rather than just focused on a specific project. Again, it comes down to choosing the right project, choosing the right examples for the submission. But that's how I circumvented that challenge.
Brilliant, thank you.
And I think so by virtue of I sit in our people and change team, so I have got quite generalist experience anyway on change management, communication, sort of behavioral and cultural change that anyway sits at quite a programmatic level. So I think I was quite fortunate that, when there were specific competencies around stakeholder management and kind of change management, that is what we do day in, day out. So yeah, it was quite fortunate that it fitted quite neatly anyway as more of a generalist. But I totally agree. It is more talking about that full program portfolio and a range of experience as opposed to just perhaps one thing that you delivered on quite a tactical area.
Brilliant, thank you. And I feel your experience. I sit in a similar place in the environment, so I can understand where you're coming from there. We're a bit like spiders, aren't we?
Yeah.
Even
Scary.
Yeah, some people, yeah. I think we've got some questions from the floor. Ellen, do you want to pick up on these?
So we have 2 pre-submitted questions. The first one is, what are the keys to a successful professional discussion?
I think we might have covered that, but have you guys got anything else you want to add to that?
Probably one thing that I would share is something that I found very useful was I was actually involved in getting Arab's learning and training program accredited by ChMc. So that gave me a good visibility in terms of what are the different competencies, what sort of training and programs, modules exist within Arab to support those competencies. So if you all have an opportunity to get hold of that organizational level mapping sheet from your organizational sponsor, then I think that should give you visibility in terms of, oh, this is how, this organization is looking at alignment of so-and-so modules with so-and-so competencies. So I thought that was a very good exercise. I was pleased that I was involved in that, because that definitely helped me with my own submission. So yeah, one piece of advice would be, in order to understand alignment between your organization's learning program and ChMc competencies, if you're able to get access to that mapping sheet, organizational level mapping sheet, I think that'll be very valuable.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'd agree with that. I was actually involved in our one too, and we've kind of transposed that now onto a degreed learning pathway, so people can go in and see the competency and see the mapping against it. But 100%, all of the courses and but it's also not just courses, is it? Sort of the fact that we've got a code of conduct, let's say, or our values, they map to the ethics competencies, for example. So it's also in a bit more of around, so both formal and perhaps on the job learning too.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly useful. I think it's important as well to remember, though, that going back to what we were saying earlier, that it's about you. So how do you apply those ethics, and how do you apply that knowledge, rather than just saying, this is what the company does. We know what Arup and KPMG do and all the other companies that we work with. How are you implementing that on a personal basis? And it's that struggle, isn't it, to get both, because we're always told it's not about you, it's about us. And that's a real challenge for all of us.
And I think the other important thing is also to think about the right projects, right? Spend a lot of time thinking about what projects you want to highlight and showcase. I mean, there's a temptation to include almost every project that we could have been involved in, but I think it's just take a pause, think about what's the right project, what does, how does it align with the competency framework, focus less on quantity and more on, quality. And maybe there's one project which kind of reflects all the competencies. I think that's sufficient, rather than highlighting a number of different projects and not really articulating the competencies really well.
Absolutely, couldn't have said it better. Yeah, spot on.
The next question is, what are the criteria for the different levels of accreditation?
That's an interesting question. I'll go first on this. There aren't different levels of accreditation. There are two different routes to accreditation. Both have the same criteria. You just have to prove a little bit more if you go through the on-program route. We ask for more evidence. And in some ways that's easier, because the evidence is, Alex, do you want to pick up on this? The evidence is much more laid out, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to essentially go against each competency area. You have to sort of put some projects in, and then against each competency, you have to almost add evidence around what you have done on projects. And then there's also a space for feedback at the bottom, or testimonials. And actually, I used a lot of our the way that we performance manage in KPMG is biannual, so your interim self-assessment and your year-end self-assessment. And in that, you obviously have to gather a lot of feedback. So I actually referred a lot to those documents to be able to extract out the feedback, to be able to sort of put against each of those competencies. And then I also did have to go around to actually clients. They really helped me to add some good kind of quotes and feedback back. So once I told them that I was going through this process, I think everyone was actually quite supportive of that. So they wrote, I think, a particular piece around, I think it was the change management aspect, because it was obviously a little bit more technical to my area, and got really verbatim sort of feedback from them. So I was able to put that in. But yeah, I have to say, going through that process, I then felt a lot more confident to talk about it, because you're gathering all of that evidence anyway. Yeah. Brilliant,
thank you. But just to reiterate that there are two routes to the status, but the criteria is the same for all of them.
That's it for today's session. Thank you, David, Alex, and Raghu, for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMc program manager or a member of the ChMc team at chmc@managers.org.uk. The next masterclass will take place on the 5th of May. Each masterclass has a unique link. A link for the next masterclass will be shared shortly. If you would like to attend the next masterclass, please register for the event and submit your questions in advance. Please submit any suggestions for the content of future masterclasses to chmc@managers.org.uk. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.